Welcome to something special. Welcome to TEDx. This TEDx event is part of a global conversation that takes place every day in every corner of the world. In schools, in theaters, in workplaces, even in prisons, people gather to hear the best ideas bubbling up in their communities. More than 3,000 TEDx events are held every year in 170 countries. It's a remarkable thing. TEDx events are self-organized under a license from TED, a non-profit organization devoted to discovering and sharing powerful ideas in the form of TED Talks. It's not TED itself, but your local TEDx team of volunteers that has done all the work to put on today's event, including booking all of the speakers. It's this team's ideas, dedication, and time that have made this possible. We really hope today's program sparks an exciting conversation. This is a day for curiosity and for skepticism, for inspiration and for action. The more you enter into it, the more you will take out. And now, on with the show.
Thank you for taking the time to come and be part of TEDxSnoIsleLibraries 2020. All around our region and state, across the country and around the globe, people just like you and me are hungry for ideas and information. We all want to know more, to imagine, and to understand. And TEDx events are organized to provide opportunities to connect us with ideas worth spreading. The TED organization has granted a license allowing Sno-Isle Libraries to independently organize this local TEDx event. Because at its core, your public library is all about providing you access to ideas and information. We've worked with some amazing individuals from our region to share some of these ideas with you. Now, the really hard work to make this happen has come from each featured speaker and all those who've worked behind the scenes. So we invite you to sit back and imagine you are sitting in the largest theater ever. In this virtual space, we are choosing to be safe, exercising our social distance, and other members of the audience are also choosing to be present. We are all expectant, ready to think deeply, and we are reimagining the quantum connections between ideas and realities. And now, on with the show.
Hi, I'm your host, Phil Klein, and welcome to TEDxSnoIsleLibraries 2020. In this online event, we'll be sharing a TEDx talk and holding a conversation with the speaker to dig deeper into their ideas for greater understanding. With me are also a team of moderators and a co-host to provide additional support if we need it. Thank you for taking the time to be with us and explore these ideas worth spreading. Throughout this hour, you're invited to ask questions in the comments section of the Zoom webinar or on the YouTube Live or Facebook Live event streams, wherever you may be. And we do hope to respond to as many of your questions as possible. And if something strikes you or inspires you, please feel free to share that as well. Teresa Wippel, our guest today, has a career that includes a long list of communications roles. She's been the weekly and daily newspaper journalist. She's worked in government public information and employee communications and in communications roles with nonprofit organizations. And for the last 11 years, she's been working on My Edmonds News, a community news site. Please welcome Teresa. Teresa, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
It is so great to see you. I wanted to start off by asking you, what made you feel like this was the right time to give a talk about community media?
There has been a lot of conversation lately about the sustainability of journalism and the fact there are financial pressures in particular on this very important role that journalism plays in our society. And I've been talking for a while with folks about ways to solve that problem and how to make it more sustainable. And this seemed like a great opportunity.
So addressing questions of sustainability and how does it keep and fulfill its vital role in our communities.
That's right.
It is so important to figure out and to understand what we need to know as citizens and community members. So thank you for that role. Why don't we go ahead and let's show and premiere your TEDx talk that you've pre-recorded, and then we'll have a conversation afterwards.
Both of my children played sports, and I was fascinated by the camaraderie of the players on the bench. Even though they weren't playing the game, they were invested in the team's success. They offered words of encouragement. They offered compliments. They even called out teammates for unacceptable behavior. And after 10 years of publishing online community news, it is clear to me that it will take a team of readers to ensure the survival of journalism. I've often said that my readers are my backup team. Sure, I have writers and photographers and graphic designers, but the readers, they have my back. They send me news tips and photos. They find typos. They suggest ideas. They tell us when we've done a good job, and they tell us when we've failed. This teamwork with readers has improved our journalism, and it has strengthened our community. Let me give you a couple of examples. A few years ago, I wrote a story about a well-worn but beloved welcome sign in town that was going to be replaced by a sleek new design. Readers had not been consulted, and they were upset. So as a result, the city created a robust community engagement process and came up with a compromise design that most people are happy with. Last year, I had an online conversation with my readers about how to best help them learn about our 4 candidates for mayor. We decided on a debate that drew about 700 people to our Performing Arts Center and found out that readers really valued what they learned. Today, we are facing another urgent issue, and that is the COVID-19 outbreak. People have lost their jobs and they fear losing their homes. Businesses have shut down or downsized. Food banks and nonprofits are overwhelmed with new clients. And as the outbreak unfolds, we are sharing stories and statistics. We're using local health district data to create charts and graphs and provide analysis. We're telling stories of survival and resiliency. Businesses filling a need by making masks. Restaurants serving meals to hospital workers. Parents trying to work from home while also homeschooling their children. My readers tell me that local news matters more than ever during a pandemic, yet traditional funding for news, paid advertising, has declined dramatically as businesses struggle to survive. If there is any silver lining in this COVID-19 cloud, it's this. During a pandemic, readers are finding value in community news, and they are willing to pay for it. As the severity of the outbreak became clear, I sent letters to my readers reminding them that we are all in this together, that they need to support us more than ever so we can continue publishing. They responded, and not only with financial support, but notes of thanks and words of encouragement. I truly felt like they had my back. Even before COVID-19, I was convinced that reader support mattered. Our democracy relies on informed citizens, and news organizations need to work harder to engage readers. But developing a team of readers can't be done overnight. It takes commitment to involve readers in the news, to value their comments, to address their concerns, to build consensus, and to moderate debate. So how do we develop a relationship of engagement and teamwork between readers and journalists? Here's the interesting thing about being on a team. You can sit passively on the sidelines, watch the game, waiting for your turn to go in, or you can become an actively engaged observer, learning from what you see, offering suggestions and advice, all in the name of teamwork. Readers need to become more involved in publications they rely on for local news. And here are a couple of examples. First of all, support your news financially. It takes money to produce news, even if you see it for free on Facebook. Do you subscribe or donate to your favorite local news source? Second, you can serve as a citizen news gatherer. Here's an example. Our local Rotary program club had a program on tech advances in farming, and we didn't have a reporter there. But a Rotarian offered to collect the information, to get photos for us, and to actually help us do a write-up of the presentation so that we can then publish it for our readers. And as a result, they learned something new, and they appreciated the information. When a news organization has a deep bench filled with supportive readers, covering the community becomes a team effort. Together, we shine a spotlight on what's working and what isn't. We can share concepts and opinions. We can encourage a constructive exchange of ideas. Journalism should be supported by and accountable to the community it serves.
Thank you so much, Teresa. Those were so many poignant points you made there. Journalism is accountable to and to serve the community. How we as readers can be involved as team members. That is a powerful idea, and I think a lot of people really aren't that familiar with how to engage as a reader in the community media enterprise that you're sharing. Can you unpack a little bit the scope of what it is you cover and how the community media that you focus on is different from other media types?
Sure. You know, local is everything to us. And by local, I mean the things that people engage with every day, whether it's schools, sports, government, everything from the arts, restaurants, where to eat, new restaurants that are opening up, youth involvement in activities, things that kids are doing to make the community better. I mean, we really cover everything that you would expect to get every week that you need to know to live your life.
Wow, so it's right at that point of what you need to know as a citizen living in your neighborhood. And, you know, it may not be like the most dramatic stories in every case, although I'm sure there's plenty of excitement in instances, but it really is the bread and butter or the meat and potatoes, or you choose your metaphor, of what people really need to learn and understand. And it's occurring to me that, you know, we're in this unique kind of media environment here, online sharing, and as a community publisher and journalist, you probably don't have a platform quite like this to share your ideas all the time, even though you're always facilitating community conversations on your own. And so I just want to take a moment to thank you for what you do to kind of make this kind of information and knowledge available day in and day out for so many people in our communities. And, you know, I know it's not just in Edmonds, but also in Mountlake Terrace and in Linwood that you also have publications. So thank you for that. So thinking a little bit more about the the community media, you're part of a kind of media source, right? An online community newspaper. Are there other examples in our region that also kind of fill this niche of providing this kind of information and service, so we as readers have an understanding of what kind of range there is in the types of publications like this?
Well, I think that when you look at local, there are regional publications that provide not only information sometimes on our communities, but also more broadly. So, for example, the Herald in Everett or the Seattle Times or even the public radio stations or television stations, they will cover our communities as well, but maybe only when something rises to the level of what they think is newsworthy. And I would say the difference between what we do and what they do is that we're maybe getting much more granular, and also we have context because we've been covering an issue for a very long time, and we can tell people not only that something happened, but why it matters.
Well, and we've had a long term, at this point, opportunity for stories to be told in local communities with COVID-19, being something that affects communities, and of course it affects things more widely, but the way it affects us in our home neighborhoods and home communities is specific. Are there some examples of stories that have been significant in this time that have been important for you to share?
I think that with COVID-19, of course, we have run some obituaries of folks who have lost their lives, sadly, and that has meant a lot to show what the impact has been directly to people. But I think one of the things that I really thought was a valuable piece that we did was we showed how senior citizens in particular were coping with a lot of the isolation that happened as a result of COVID, especially early on. Some of the seniors who were in our assisted living facilities, we do have about 20% of our population in Edmonds is seniors, and we do have a fair number of assisted living facilities, and those folks were basically shut in and not able to communicate, but yet we were able to show how they were connecting with family members via their iPads and learning some, how to do the the chat and all of that, FaceTime, and how the organizers of those senior centers and assisted living facilities were really trying to help their residents cope. And it was hopeful. It wasn't a depressing story. It was a hopeful story of how I think is the essence of what we're trying to do as a world in trying to figure out how to address this new reality we're in and coping and trying to be resilient and survive.
Wow. And you've just encapsulated so much of what's important for this dynamic that you've talked about in your talk, which is the team relationship between readers and you as a journalist. I think historically, or at least my impression has been that you have journalists who choose a subject and they relate to that subject, and that subject may be a reader or may not be a reader, but the kind of engagement is entirely driven by the journalist. But you're presenting an idea of engagement for readers, and I assume many of our listeners today, and certainly those who see this talk afterwards, will be people who primarily consume things as listeners or as readers rather than as writers. Can you talk a little bit about how this journey of engagement begins and ways that it expresses itself when you connect with readers?
I'd be happy to. The one thing I will say is that it doesn't happen overnight. I've been doing the Edmonds site, publishing it for 11 years. And when I first started out, nobody knew who I was. I had to kind of earn the respect of people to know the approach that I was taking. They knew that I'd lived in Edmonds for a long time, of course, because I shared that and knew that I had a journalism background. But I had to earn their respect by showing that I was committed to covering the issues fairly and also to moderating the discussions fairly. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do. A lot of news organizations have gotten rid of their comment sections for a reason, because the debate can get contentious. People can get, they aren't necessarily respectful, and it's a lot of work to moderate that level of conversation. And I'm committed to it. And I think that's part of what's happened over the 11 years is that people know that I'm tireless and devoted to covering the community in a way that tries to move us forward.
Yeah, so this commenting dynamic is the first way that people probably start to share, and they'll be just simply expressing, but they may not have the kind of familiarity with how what they say comes across to a listener. And so you're in this role of facilitating, of helping to mediate or moderate that discussion. Can you tell us a little bit about how you go about doing that, and what would help readers to do some portion of that themselves, in a way that would make them, a little bit more effective in their participation, let's say?
Yeah. I think what's real important is to have a code of conduct, which most news organizations have now, especially when they do allow for online commentary. There's rules of engagement, right? And we have that on our website. And I refer people to that often when I feel like we're getting off course with our commentary, or I will individually reach out to readers to let them know why I've moderated a comment in a certain way. And in 11 years, I've only banned one commenter, which I think is a pretty good track record out of 50 or 60,000 comments, however many we've had over the years. But I think that's key. I'll also say, Phil, that a lot of people never comment. They lurk, right? Just like people lurk on Facebook. They read, but they never comment. And that's for a variety of reasons. But they often will send me individual emails about things and say, I didn't feel comfortable commenting, but I want you to know I appreciated, what you did there, or kind of what the conversation was. Or they'll write a letter to the editor, or more of the traditional kinds of commentary that people might feel more comfortable with.
Okay, so two ways to participate so far, right? Commenting and doing so in accordance with a code of conduct is a good way to start to participate. And there is this little bit of a sense of, oh, I have a megaphone if I'm commenting that might keep people from expressing themselves freely. And then they can write you directly. And when they do that, does it sometimes cultivate ongoingly into a more engaged role over time?
Yes. Yeah. And both online and one-on-one, that happens. And I guess even more valuable to me is the relationship the readers are developing with each other. I mean, I can give you numerous examples of how readers who may be very much opposed in their viewpoints have, in pre-COVID times, actually met each other for a beer or for coffee and talked through their differences. And they've talked about that on the site, how they did that, or they told me that personally. And for me, that is really more valuable than many other things I've done, in knowing that engagement is happening and that I've facilitated that in some way.
I'm remembering, at least in some publications, they even have a dating column. You people could meet and get to know each other in certainly more reconciliatory ways if, like if they have something positive in common, then resolving what would be negative. But yeah, I mean, figuring out how we engage and interact in a way that lets our differences transform into understanding, that is a powerful service that can happen when you have different viewpoints coming together in a publication like yours. Is there an example of a case where different viewpoints on an issue came together and there was a need to do that kind of moderation, and you felt like it was either successful or you learned something from it?
Well, I think there are times you can't ever get people to agree. And there are times when people are so diametrically opposed in their viewpoints that they will never find a common ground. But the way I've tried to moderate and the discussion, or at least observe and dive in when I need to, is that if people are feeling like, if it's apparent from the conversation that people are seeing an opening to maybe come up with something that's a consensus, then I do try to insert myself and push that along. But most of the time, frankly, I just let folks have their say and move on, because the truth is that usually it works itself out. And I think you and I were talking about this earlier. A lot of times, the readers are the ones who jump in and point people, in the right direction. It's not me, it's them. And that's really the way I like it. I want it to be that. I want them to be the ones taking the lead and saying, maybe you shouldn't say it that way. Maybe you should, you might want to think about saying it this way if you want to get your point across. And that happens a lot.
I think you mentioned in a previous conversation about you held a session where people developed a set of guidelines for improving how they engaged and interacted with each other, and it was productive for the attendees of that.
Yeah, we did actually a series of 3 last year. They were called the 3 practices, and it's 2 gentlemen who have been doing this over time, who agreed to facilitate some of these in-person meetings for us, and they were very valuable. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we've not been able to do that this year. But I did have readers who were actually mirroring the language that they learned from those sessions in the commentary. There's a phrase that they use in their training called "I'd be curious to know" as a way to try to not shut people down when you have a conversation. And I would have people making their comments starting with "I'd be curious to know," and it was clear that they were, showing that they had learned something.
That's great. It reminds me of in Civility First, which was one of the TEDx interviews we had here. Curiosity is the superpower when you can't have a cordial conversation with someone that is civil. That's great. So there are ways to improve how we engage, and they can result in these kinds of progressing communication dialogues when people feel seen and heard, and when you give them a place to have their voice heard, and then basically make room for that. That seems to play naturally into the sort of news gatherer role that you described the Rotarians playing. Can you describe, how does someone become a community news gatherer or increase their participation in terms of contributing information or ideas?
I think it starts with having a little bit of a relationship with the news organization itself, which isn't hard to do. I think some people might think that's intimidating, but, I'm very accessible, and I think most people are. It's just, make a phone call, send an email, and say, hey, I am going to this meeting. I don't know if you're planning on attending, but I think it might make some good fodder for your publication, or you might want to get a photo of it or have me take a photo. Are you interested in that? That happens a lot. I have people who say, I'm going to this event, or it happens more with photos of things, but I just came across this when I was walking along and I thought you might like this photo. I probably get 3 or 4 photo submissions a day from people that I run that are just unsolicited, and news is the same. So sometimes it's a story idea that we follow up on, but a lot of times, especially with COVID, we're doing so much more remotely now that we really do appreciate it when people just send things to us that they've come across. But, doing a kind of a pre-solicitation with an editor and saying, hey, what would you think about me writing up something on this is helpful. But a lot of times people won't even ask me. They'll just send me something, and then we'll go back and forth and see if it's something we're interested in, and go from there.
This is great. It's occurring to me that you're really kind of raising some questions about something many people may take for granted, which is that journalists are over there and, readers are over here. And there's a bit of an us and versus them dialogue. And there's even maybe some animosity about why are those journalists that way? What would you say to people who are either skeptical or may have a negative attitude about either journalism or journalists, particularly in your community setting?
Yeah, journalism has been under fire lately, nationally, and probably more nationally, I would say. I think that studies have shown that people have much more trust for their community journalists than they do the national journalists. There's more suspicion there about their agendas, I think. But I think that, journalism tends to train you that you are kind of above it all. I mean, I don't mean that in necessarily a negative, critical way. It's just that you're taught as a journalist to be objective, and in your mind that means you're fair, and that means you maybe don't. You may come across as not really caring about the impact of your stories because you're trying to be so objective and fair. And I think what journalism needs, and it partially comes to this engagement with readers. I think where we need to land to increase our relationship with our readers and our, better perception of journalism in the eyes of readers is we need to become more connected to the communities that we serve, and see what the impact, think about the impacts of the stories we write, maybe before we write them, and how we want to present them so that they are really connected to the community. And I hope that makes sense, but it's not that I think that journalists are necessarily doing a bad job, but I do think that sometimes we've gotten away from our core mission of really caring about the communities that we cover.
Yes, because caring can seem like it's different from having that objective point of view.
Yes.
And, some people might say that journalists have their own interests at heart rather than the interests of the community. And so they may be hesitant to trust based on that. It's how do you make room for both caring and trying to be fair?
It's a tough balance. It really is. And I think it's different. I definitely think it's different when you're working for a national publication. I mean, it's just a different ball game all around. But I do think that you have to look at and you have to communicate with your audience what your values are and what your reason is for doing what you do. It's a little easier, I think, at the community level because your interest is right there. I live in my community. I love being here and writing about, telling the stories of our community. If you're working for the New York Times, it might, and you're doing a national story, it might be a little different. But I think whatever we can do to humanize who we are and to show that we do have the best interests of our community at heart, it will help us to establish more credibility with our audience.
Well, and no one would say that you have to be perfect. And
No.
I mean, there's a reason there's a corrections column occasionally that you probably have to publish.
And I'm not perfect.
No, and things change over time. What's true
Yeah.
this month may be different in a month or two.
Yeah.
So critical to kind of try and find that balance. And I think a lot of people, we're getting some comments already that they very much appreciate what you're doing. And, I'm sure there's, all different kinds of feedback that you've become accustomed to getting different points of view. Does that ever get familiar when, that, do you ever get used to having people who disagree and dispute what you say? And have you found ways to kind of integrate that into a healthy way so that those people still have their voice, feel like their voice is heard, but you're also still moderating that against either, let's say facts or different points of view?
It's tough. And I think you and I were talking earlier about this, and I'll share it. I had a gentleman who has been a longtime reader of ours who sent me a note about a month ago or so, and he was very frustrated and upset that there were commenters who were specifically talking about COVID-19 and questioning some of the health directives of, health officials about, some of the decisions they were making. And he just felt it was counterproductive to trying to keep the community safe that those comments were allowed. And my response to him was that I would prefer to have that conversation on our website in context when I know that readers will offer opposing viewpoints and provide some context rather than having that same comment be made in a social media bubble, maybe on Facebook, and there would be no counter argument to it. Because let's face it, in our social media worlds, we're often with people who agree with us. And I think one of the values I can present is a diverse range of opinions that challenge each other's viewpoints and kind of makes people think twice about what they're saying.
Wow. So there's a difference between what you're talking about and a free-for-all, right? You're talking about a curated presentation or a sensitive presentation of different points of view in a single place so that those points of view can be shared. And I believe maybe 15 or more years ago, there was this idea of now that we have a read-write web, like the internet, we'll let everybody say what they have to say and everybody read what everyone else says. And then, of course, in the last 10 years, we've seen that people develop these filter bubbles. And, like you say in Facebook, people are only communicating to people, who either like them or who they already know. So how do people moderate that in your environment? And how do you encourage this kind of different set of rules to take place in a way that is productive and that, helps people to actually open their minds a little bit more or move the conversation ahead of where it is just reinforcing pre-existing ideas?
Again, I will turn to my readers to an extent, because there are a few that I can always count on to bring the conversation back to the center. I mean, I'll do it if I need to, but I think it has more value when it's not coming from me, because my role is not to lecture to people, and it's not to, I mean, I want to keep the code of conduct straight, but in terms of offering diverse viewpoints and bringing people back to the middle, oftentimes there are readers who do that for me. And again, it's that idea of having that team approach to what community journalism is. It takes, I hate to use this well-worded phrase, but it really does take a village.
Yeah, I feel somewhat awe-inspired by the vision of a community coming together where it can be just a cacophony of different voices speaking over one another, and to have a voice that helps to kind of orient and help people to take turns as they speak, and to ensure that they've been heard, but to do so in a more organized manner. So it's a humbling notion that that's taking place in your newspaper and your online journal and so on. You mentioned these 4 commitments that you have as a journalist. And I'd love you to speak a little to each one of them. And, they are to value their comments, to address their concerns, to build consensus, and to moderate debate. I think you've spoken to some of them a little bit, but if you wanted to speak to each of them in turn, and especially on how you build consensus and what that means, I don't think we've really discussed that at all. Could you unpack those a little bit more for us?
Yeah, and you may need to remind me of the list
yes,
if I get lost.
Not a problem.
In terms of building consensus, that is probably the biggest challenge, because I don't know that you can ever completely build consensus in a community with diverse viewpoints, and in a democracy, right? The whole idea of a democracy is that we're always sharing different ideas and trying to come to a center, which is consensus, but it's a never-ending target sometimes, right? We're always, new information comes in, and we're starting to, kind of, maybe we change our minds a lot, which is, maybe part of the consensus process. But again, I think that directing people down a road of, here's some more information, providing context, providing links. I think something that, again, if you've been covering a community for 11 years, you are able to say, well, we covered that story 3 years ago. I was at that meeting. We have the details here. Here's the link. You might want to read more. And again, it's not always me sharing that. It's sometimes a reader who remembers, or a reader who went off on their own and read the council minutes for the last 3 years and came up with all the hours the city attorney just spent on, a certain project. And I mean, I didn't even think about that or have time to do it, but he did it, and it was extra information for people to have. So I think when building consensus, it really is a matter of giving people the information they need so they can see the logic in why we might find a solution to something. And again, the context. So what else? Because I've already forgotten the list.
Yeah, sure. So just to wrap up on that, consensus can often be sort of identifying that center wherein which a decision can be made about what you think or how you want to relate or behave. You mentioned valuing their comments. How do you value your readers' comments?
Well, sometimes it's not easy when, journalists, we say we are objective and fair, and I think we try to be, but we also have our own personal opinions, right? And sometimes people comment just to press people's buttons, right? And that's happening. And it's sometimes valuable and sometimes it's not. And so I value comments, but I don't always approve every comment. Or sometimes I'll delete a comment that shouldn't have been approved in the first place after I've looked at it and said, okay, that really just wasn't approved. And I will let readers know when I do that, and I will apologize if I think I approved a comment too hastily and it was clear I shouldn't have. I'm not perfect either. But I think that valuing the fact that people feel comfortable enough to share their opinions and to be willing to put themselves out there. And Phil, this is one other thing that we haven't talked about yet, but I do require people to use their real first and last names in our comments. It's something that I let people know up front. I do my best to research, who they are. I ask them to provide a city of residence the first time they comment, to try to verify who they are. Because I believe if you're willing to call somebody out for something, you better be willing to put your name behind it. And I think that does help us to keep the conversation at least a little bit more civil, because you do have to put your name next to it. It's not a pseudonym.
Well, that seems to be a way to address the issue of disinformation. Do you feel like your site is affected by bots and trolls the same way other media sources are, or does this kind of filtering of input and verifying the identity help to address that?
It helps to identify. It helps to address that. We have had a few instances where people have slipped in under the radar, and guess what? It was my readers who told me that was the case. They actually took it upon themselves when they saw a name that didn't look right to them or a comment that didn't look right to them, and they alerted me to it, and I missed it. And again, that is the value of having this team of people who have my back and who are helping me to do the right thing. And we are much less likely to have that happen to us because those policies are in place.
So distributed care, in a way, your readers are serving to distribute some of the care that you want to offer. It may be imperfect, but it's better than letting everybody, just have a free-for-all. And then you mentioned addressing their concerns. How do you address readers' concerns?
It's in many ways. Like I said, I don't hesitate to admit when I made a mistake, when I've done something wrong, when I might have thought about something again that maybe we should have done differently. I try to be as transparent as I can be with people about that when it happens. A lot of times those concerns get addressed privately with emails. I mean, people will comment on the site, but sometimes people will just personally send me an email, or sometimes they'll even call me and say, I really wish you would have included this perspective, or I really think you should do this next time, or I really think you made a mistake here. And a lot of times there's compliments as well, but it is listening and acknowledging when people think that we've missed the mark. And I don't think that happens enough in journalism either, by the way.
Yeah, so actually I'd like to start turning to some of the questions that we're getting. So it's so interesting because really the news tends to feel impersonal a lot of the time. And we have a comment from Victor on Zoom that relations, mostly our world, is impersonal. With Teresa's network, it really is personal. Teresa and her journalists are known by many around town and are a part of the community, and they know us. I have to say that's a game-changing kind of statement if it's widely held, because what it is a testimonial to is that people feel seen and heard, and even more than that, they feel known and understood, which is, if we had a world where our news media knew and understood us as community members, just think how that would transform our communities. I mean, maybe you're living in that transformed community now. What would you say to a comment like that about about how it's creating your community?
Well, first of all, it's very humbling to hear that because it is really a goal of mine to make sure we are part of the community. I mean, that's what community journalism really is about, is, you are, people know who you are when you walk with your camera up the street and want to take a picture of their dog. I mean, it's just it's a connection with the community that you show up at a public meeting and you talk to the people who were there and they see your face. And again, we're talking about pre-COVID. We'll get back there someday. But they know who you are because you're there. You show up. We show up. We don't cover from afar. We don't just drop in when there's a hot story that needs to be, covered. It is in the trenches community coverage that people value because they know we're there for the long haul. And that's exactly what I had hoped to build when I started this 11 years ago.
Bob on Zoom asks, why is the moderated community news a discussion as compared to the confirmation bias of Facebook, etc.? Doesn't that just happen if the community news gets a diverse set of readers, which is chance, which is not?
I would say that can be true, that it could be chance, but I don't think after 11 years of working to build a community of readers and trust and respect, that it is chance. I think it is planned, and it's happened because it has, we've worked at it, and not just me. Yes, I'm the publisher, but the readers have worked with me to make it happen, and they are there and they help with it. And that's not chance. That's creating a community that invites that kind of collaboration and respect, as opposed to people who have a Facebook account.
Yes, and I mean, I think you'd have to say that the way Facebook communities grow or Facebook individuals grow is through, more selective identification within Facebook's algorithm of who you get to see and how much things get promoted in certain ways, which is more mechanically driven or artificial intelligence driven. So I think there are some differences in just how those operate.
Yeah.
Okay, another question we have is, another comment about how valuable and important the news is in your resource. There was this comment about the Center for the Information, the Center for Informed Public at the UW. There was a recent TEDx presentation that seemed to suggest that all news is misinformation, despite being objective viewpoint or opinion. That's, it still seems to be that misinformation gets through. What is your view about that?
I don't think we're ever going to be able to stop misinformation completely. It's just the nature of where we are with so many diverse viewpoints. But I think if COVID has shown us anything, it has been that there are facts and statistics and things that have been very important in showing us what is working and what isn't. And, we, as an example, early on, we chose to spend a lot of time personalizing graphs and charts and data to show people what the realities were of how the virus was spreading in the communities and how it had changed over time. And I don't think, I know that there's always some debate about stats and facts, statistical facts, but we have tried to be as factual as we can, but in the context of showing how people are responding to the data and also trying to cope with the impacts of it. And I don't, misinformation is a difficult thing to combat at a national or international level. I think at a local level it's a lot easier because you are right there and when things are right or wrong because you're living it. It's not something that's out there happening somewhere else. It's happening here. And so we know whether it's misinformation or not for the most part.
Yeah. Okay. A question from Randy. Have you ever actively asked for citizens to act as journalists? You mentioned the news gatherer situation, but just sort of, I guess, building on that.
Yeah. Well, most of my writers and photographers who do regular work for me are people who just live in the community and who at one point or another came to me and asked, or I might have approached them and asked if I saw they had a particular skill set, if they'd want to do some writing for me. We have columnists who write on a variety of topics, who are people who live in our community. We have people who contribute who have volunteered to do so. I haven't really had to put out job descriptions per se for people who write for me. It's been really organic, and that's part of what's made it valuable because they are people who live in our community and they care, and they're doing it from a place of wanting to be part of what we're doing as opposed to just a job.
Yeah, and do they start to integrate some of the journalistic ideas of, being a good editor and, kind of moderating within themselves as they express themselves as well?
Oh yeah, I mean there's some training involved, and there's some I definitely hold the hand of people who are just starting out and helping to do some work with us. But that's been part of the value of being able to provide people with an ability to express some creative sides that they didn't necessarily know they were able to do in their own town.
Maybe we can all become readers, writers, and reporters in one way or another.
Yeah.
Bob on Zoom asks, there have been some interesting developments during the recent demonstrations in Seattle. First, there seems to have been an issue between the press, media, and the police who are trying to control those who are violating the law. Any perspective on that debate?
Well, we have, I'll just say that we haven't talked about this yet, but, we've had a lot of racial justice demonstrations here in Edmonds. There's actually a youth-led one today that's happening, and it's, we're not, and Linwood and Mount Lake Terrace as well have had their own protests and demonstrations. So we're definitely in the thick of things, even though we're not maybe as heavily impacted as Seattle. And, I think it's a tough balance that journalists have in covering the police and public safety because, police tend to send us a lot of information that in the past, maybe we have taken at face value. And one of the things that I think has become very clear over time in my conversations I've had with journalists and other communities is it's really important to make sure that we're transparent in how we work with all of our news sources, including our police news sources. There's a lot of dynamics at play in that I think over time we're going to see some interesting changes coming in how maybe journalists and police officers interact in the future, just in terms of transparency.
Can you say a little more about that?
Yeah, I think there was one conversation I had that was really interesting for it's something that's been circulating quite a bit, but kind of the conversation about officer-involved shootings, that's a term that was used fairly commonly with police, and journalists would use that without really thinking about it. But now can we just say what it is, which is that it is a police officer shooting a citizen or, a member of the community. And, it's kind of like it depersonalizes it when you call it an officer-involved shooting. But when you actually say what's happening, it makes it more transparent as to what's really going on. And so there's a lot of lingo, I guess. That's how I would start it. It's just, and there's a lot of lingo, a lot of statements that have been made in the past that I think might be changing over time as journalists figure out how they can better cover, the police actions in their communities that are having a negative impact.
Yeah, those words matter. And it's beautiful how you're articulating how that can be approached with greater sensitivity and intelligence and transparency. We have a lot of comments as well as questions, so I'll try to get to more of the comments as well. Mary on Zoom comments, I appreciate your commitment to journalism, but she also asks, you obviously work tirelessly. How do you care for yourself to avoid burnout?
I get asked that question a lot. One of the things that I'm really hoping to be able to figure out, and I still haven't quite after 11 years, but how do you replicate what I'm trying to do elsewhere, right? And by that, I don't mean necessarily the websites themselves, but kind of the approach, because it is a 24/7 commitment, right? 7 days a week. I mean, I don't necessarily let it go. I have people who help me and they're wonderful, but at the end of the day, I'm still the one who's in charge. But I love what I do and I'm energized by it and I'm passionate about it. And I've never had more fun. I've never had a job that I've had more fun with than what I'm doing now. And so I guess I view it like any other, I'll just say, small business owner or entrepreneur who starts something that they love. I guess maybe if you're passionate about it, you don't feel burnt out by it. That's not to say that there aren't days when I just want to turn off my computer for an extended period of time. But it is something that I feel I want to be doing for as long as I can do it, as long as I can do it.
So you mentioned the need for support for community news outlets. How do you ensure that there's the appropriate communication of that need, meaning that, it's fully expressed and, a lot of people just will wake up one day and their community news outlets is gone. How does a readership become informed about the either financial and sustainability of their community newsletters, and what can they do about that?
I think that's one of the biggest myths that people have failed to really recognize about journalism, and that especially in the era of social media and whatever appears in your Facebook feed or on your phone. Everything that you see is not produced for free. And I'm not going to be self-serving to say it's, give us money personally, but give whoever you read money. Subscribe. Don't expect to just have it show up. I pay everybody who works for me. I don't expect them to work for free. And every news organization is in the same boat. And we have to figure this out, because democracy really relies on an informed citizenry and trying to make people understand, or engage them in understanding what's important and why it matters. And if we don't have journalists covering meetings and providing information in a kind of a one-stop shop where people can learn about that, I think we're going to be in a world of hurt as a democracy, even more than we might be now. And it's important. So financially support, who you read, and show them that you value it because it matters.
Great. And continue on that theme. How long did it take time-wise for the journalist reader team to form? Did it coincide with the transition from going to a bit more profitable enterprise?
Yeah, I think that helped. I mean,
if they say profitable, that was word. I did not insert those words there.
I tell people that I'm a nonprofit. I'm a for-profit in theory, but in any case, I think that it takes time. I mean, I was speaking with a gentleman who just started an online news site in the Olympia area, and he was asking me kind of how he could start asking readers for money, and what he should do to start getting financially profitable. And he'd been in business for like 3 months, and I said, you got to give it time. I mean, this is not something that just happens overnight. You have to establish credibility. You have to let people see you're out there, that you mean what you say you mean, that you're really giving to your community so that they know you're there for the long haul. And yes, so it does take a little bit of time to set things up. But, I would say after about a year of doing, or 6 months of doing what I did, I thought maybe that we had enough site traffic to start selling advertising. So we did that. And then over time, it's been in the last 3 or 4 years that I've really focused a lot on asking readers to support us, kind of like the NPR model or the public television model of asking people to donate to us, give us whatever they feel like they can afford on a monthly basis or a yearly basis, just to help support us. And that's been a big focus of mine for the last few years, because I think that's where journalism is going to need to go to its readers to survive.
Laurie on Facebook asks, for individuals who do not feel comfortable commenting, yet strongly agree or disagree with a comment, if you'd be able to source the resources, would you explore the ways for citizens to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down or something like that, right? And I think she's speaking to a bigger issue, which is that, it would have to be anonymous and the neighborhood and the commenter could still be included. Right. And we do have introverts in the world who are shy and prefer not to be seen or called out for their opinions or points of view, but still want to be heard.
Right. It's funny you would say that because, or that Lori would say that, because we did have a thumbs up and thumbs down feature on our site for a while. And then, of course, it went sideways because there were people who were thinking that there was some manipulation going on with too many thumbs up or too many thumbs down on something that they thought should have been one way or the other. And it just got to the point where that was the focus of the commentary, was how many thumbs up or thumbs down something got. And I thought, oh, this is ridiculous. I mean, that's not what we're here for. We're not a polling place. But anyway, so I might bring back the thumbs up. Who knows? We'll see. But I do think that's a good point. There are a lot, like I said earlier, there are lots of lurkers. There are lots of people who don't feel comfortable commenting. And also I'll be honest, there's a few commenters who tend to take up all the air in the room. They comment more frequently than others, and they tend to kind of take over the conversation, and that's intimidating. And I recognize that. And I do try to step in when I feel like things are getting overwhelming, or maybe not approve a comment that just seems to be beating a dead horse, so to speak. But it's hard for those introverts. I empathize with that. I understand what you're saying.
Well, thank you for not only the care, but the empathy, I think, for your reader. It's just very clear. What is a final thing that you'd like to leave us with? We're coming near the end of our time together. How would you like to see things move forward from here? Or what is a final thought you'd like to leave us with?
Journalism, as I've said earlier, really does matter more than I think people think. And I know that there are, the fake news and all the other things that people want to say about journalism, that I understand why we've obtained that reputation in some circles. But I would like to encourage people to look at the alternative. What is our democracy like without information being provided that gives you a way to engage with your government, with your community? The things that we share with each other, the successes, the failures, all the things that we celebrate and we mourn in our communities right now. And that's what journalism does. That's what it's meant to do. It's meant to give you a place to be able to see how you can better engage and how you can make your world better. And I just hope that people will think about what they would miss if that was gone, and what they can do to make sure that it thrives.
Thank you. Thank you for putting eyes on our communities from within the communities and together as a community. It's really important and powerful, and I can see why you were given Person of the Year award in 2019. And to all those who commented whose questions we didn't get to, I'm going to ask Teresa if she wouldn't mind commenting on the Facebook and YouTube channel after the end of our session today, so that you can continue the conversation. Thank you all for joining and taking the time. For today, it's TEDxSnoIsle Libraries. Phil Klein signing off. Thank you.
TEDxSnoIsle Libraries 2020 has been made possible through the generous support of corporate and community-based organizations who believe in the power of ideas and information. We'd like to thank these organizations for partnering with us. Coastal Community Bank, serving the financial needs of customers throughout Western Washington. Coastal Community Bank, where community is not just their middle name, it's how they do business. Community Transit of Snohomish County, providing public transportation alternatives and solutions which help people get from where they are to where they want to be. Overdrive, always innovating to help libraries transform by providing digital content such as ebooks, audiobooks, magazines, and video for public libraries. Washington Energy Services, providing heating, cooling, and other service solutions to help Puget Sound residents save energy and live better. And our founding partner, the Sno-Isle Libraries Foundation, committed to mobilizing people and resources to expand the reach of Sno-Isle Library services, promote civic engagement, and foster a lifetime of learning.